Introduction. It is not surprising that the age faced with the threat of thermonuclear extinction should look nostalgically to periods when diplomacy carried with less drastic penalties, when wars were limited and catastrophe was almost inconceivable. Nor is it strange in such circumstances that the attainment of peace should become the overriding concern, or that the need for peace should be thought to provide the impetus for its attainment. But the attainment of peace is not as easy as the desire for it. Not for nothing is history associated with the figure of Nemesis, which defeats man by fulfilling his wishes in a different form, or by answering his prayers too completely. Those ages in which in retrospect seem the most peaceful were least search of peace. Those who quest for it seems unending appear to achieve tranquility. Whenever peace conceived as the avoidance of war, as the primary objective of a power or a group of powers, the international system has been at mercy of the most ruthless members of the international community. Whenever the international order has acknowledged that certain principle cannot be compromised even for the sake of peace, stability based on an equilibrium of forces was at the least conceivable. Stability, then, has commonly resulted not from the quest for peace, but from a general accepted legitimacy. Legitimacy as it here used should not be confused with justice. It means no more than an international agreement about the nature of a workable arrangements and about the permissible aims and methods of foreign policy. It implies the acceptance of a framework of international order by all major powers, at least to the extent that no state is so dissatisfied that like Germany after the Treaty of Versailles, it expresses dissatisfaction in a revolutionary foreign policy. A legitimate order does not make conflicts impossible, but it limits their scope. War may occur, but they will be fought in the name of an existing structure, and the peace which follows will be justified as a better expression of the legitimate general consensus. Diplomacy in the classic sense, the adjustment of differences through negotiation, is possible only in legitimate international orders. Whenever there exists a power which considers the international order or the manner of legitimizing its oppressive relations between and other powers will be revolutionary. In such cases, it is not the adjustment of differences within a given system which will be at issue, but the system itself. The adjustments are possible, but they will be conceived as a tactical maneuver to consolidate positions for the inevitable showdown or as tools to undermine the morale of the antagonist. To be sure, the motivation of a revolutionary power may well be defensive, but it may well be sincere exploitations of the feeling threatened. But the distinguishing feature of a revolutionary power is not to feel threatened. Such feeling is inherent in the nature of international relations based on sovereign states, but that nothing can be reassured. Only absolute security, the neutralization of the opponent, is considered a sufficient guarantee, and thus the desire of one power for absolute security means the absolute insecurity for all other parties. Diplomacy, the art of restraining the exercise of power, cannot function in such an environment. It is a mistake to assume that diplomacy can always settle international disputes if there is a good faith and a willingness to come to an agreement. For in a revolutionary international order, each power will seem to its opponents to lack precisely these qualities. Diplomats can still meet, but they cannot persuade, for they have ceased to speak the same language. In the absence of an agreement on what constitute a reasonable demand, diplomatic conferences are occupied with sterile repetitions of basic positions and accusations of bad faith or allegations of unreasonableness and subversion. They become elaborate stage plays which attempt to attach as yet uncommitted powers to one of the opposing systems. For powers long accustomed to tranquility and route experience with disaster, this was a hard lesson to come by. Lulled by a period of stability which has seemed permanent, they find it nearly impossible to take it at face value, the exertion of revolutionary power. That means to smash the existing framework. The defenders of the status quo therefore tend to begin by treating the revolutionary power as if its pretensions were merely tactical, as if they were really accepting the existing legitimacy but overstates its case for its bargaining purposes, as if it were motivated by specific grievances to be assigned by limited concessions. Those who warn against the danger in times are considered alarmists. Those who console adaptation to circumstance are considered balanced insane. For they have all good reasons on their side. The argument accepted as valid in the existing framework, appeasement, where is not a device to gain time, is the result of an inability to come to grips with a policy of unlimited objectives, but is the essence of a revolutionary power that possesses the courage of its convictions, that it is willing to indeed, eager to push its principles to their ultimate conclusion. Whatever else a revolutionary power may achieve, therefore, tends to erode, if not the legitimacy of the international order, at least the restraint with such a order operates. The characteristics of a stable order is its spontaneity. The essence of a revolutionary situation is its self-conscience. The principle of obligation in a period of legitimacy are taken so much for granted that they never talk about, and such periods therefore appear to posterity as shallow and self-righteous. Principles in a revolutionary situation are so central that they're constantly talked about. The very stability of the effort soon drains them of all meaning, and it is unusual to find both sides evoking their versions of their true nature of legitimacy in identical terms. And because in revolutionary situations the contending systems are less concerned with the adjustment of differences than with the subversion of loyalties, diplomacy is replaced either by war or by an armaments race. The work will deal a decade which throws the problems into sharp relief. The conclusions and the aftermath of wars of the French Revolution, few periods illustrate so well with the dilemma posed by the appearance of a revolutionary power. The tendency of turns to change their meaning and of even the most familiar relationships to alter their significance. A new philosophy boldly claimed that it would recast the existing structure of obligation, and revolutionary France set about to give their claim effect. What can make authority legitimate had been defined by Rousseau as the key question of politics. However, they might try. His opponents could not eliminate the question. Henceforth, disputes no longer concern the adjustment of differences with an accepted framework, but the validity of the framework itself. The political context becomes doctrinal. The balance of power, which has operated so intricately throughout the 18th century, suddenly lost its flexibility, and the European equilibrium came to seem as insufficient protection to powers faced by a France which proclaimed the incompatibility of its political maxims with those of the other states. But the half-hearted efforts of Prussia and Austria to restore the legitimate ruler of France to his former position only accelerated the revolutionary. A French army based on conscription, inconceivable even the most absolutist rulers by the grace of God, defeated the invading armies and overran the Low Countries. And then appeared a conqueror which sought to translate the moral claims of the French Revolution into reality. Under the impact of Napoleon, there disintegrated not only a system of legitimacy of the 18th century, but with it the physical safeguard which contemporaries at least seemed the prerequisite of stability. The Napoleonic Empire, for all its extents, demonstrated, however, a tenuousness of a conquest not accepted by subjugated peoples. Although Napoleon had succeeded in overthrowing the existing concept of legitimacy, he cannot replace it with an alternative. Europe was unified from Neon to the Bay of Biscay, but the force had replaced obligation. The material achievements of the French Revolution outrun their moral base. Europe was united, but only negatively, and its opposition to a power felt as foreign, which is the surest indication of the absence of legitimacy and a conscience of otherness, was soon endowed with moral claims and became the basis of nationalism. When Napoleon was defeated in Russia, the problem of constructing a legitimate order confronted Europe in its most concrete form, for the opposition can create a wide consensus, perhaps even the widest attainable one, but its components united by what they do not like may be greatly at odds about what should replace it. It is for this reason that the year 1812 is the starting point of our discussion. However, one conceives it and has been given a variety of interpretations ranging from the moral vindication of national self-determination to the tragic destiny of the hero. The year marked the moment which it became evident that Europe was not to be organized by force, but the alternative was not nearly so apparent. It was clear that the new forces loose in the world clamoring for popular participation in government, but it seems equally evident that the forces has been responsible for a quarter of a century of turmoil. The French Revolution had dealt perhaps a mortal blow to the divine rights of kings, yet the representatives of this very doctrine were called upon to end a generation of bloodshed. In these circumstances, what is surprising is not how imperfect was the settlement that emerged, but how sane, and not how reactionary according to the self-righteous doctrines of the 19th century historiography, but how balanced. It may not have been fulfilled all the hopes of an idealistic generation, but it gave the generation something perhaps more precious, a period of stability which made their hopes to be realized without a major war or a permanent revolution. And our account will end in 1822, when the international order which emerged out of the revolutionary conflict which assumed the form it was retained for over a generation. The period of stability which ensued was the proof that a legitimate order had been constructed, an order accepted by all major powers, so that henceforth they sought the adjustment within its framework rather than its overthrow. That Europe rescued stability from seeing chaos was primarily the result of two great men, of Castlereagh, the British Foreign Secretary who negotiated the international settlement, and Austria's minister Metternich, who legitimized it. This is not to say that an international order emerged from personal intuition. Every statesman must attempt to reconcile what is considered just with every statesman must attempt to reconcile what is considered just, what is considered possible. What is considered just depends on the domestic structure of his state. What is possible depends on its resources, the geographic position and determination, and on the resources and determination of the domestic structure of other states. Thus, Castlereagh, secure in the knowledge of England's insular safety, intended to oppose only overt aggression. But Metternich, the statesman of a power situated in the center of the continent, sought above all to foresaw upheavals. Convinced of the unassailability of its domestic institutions, the insular power developed a doctrine of non-interference in domestic affairs of other states. Impressed by the vulnerability of its domestic structure in the age of nationalism, the polyglot Austro-Hungarian Empire insisted on a generalized right of interference to defeat social unrest whenever it occurs, because Britain was threatened only if Europe fell under the domination of a single power. Castlereagh was primarily concerned with constructing a balance of forces, because the balance of power only limits the scope of aggression but does not prevent it. Metternich sought to buttress the equilibrium by developing a doctrine of legitimacy and established himself as its custodian. Each failed as he succeeded. Castlereagh in making Britain a permanent part of the concert of Europe, Metternich in preserving the principle of legitimacy he had striven so hard to establish, but their achievements were not inconsiderable. A period of peace lasting 100 years, a stability so pervasive that it may have contributed to a disaster. For a long interval of peace, the sense of tragical loss, it was forgotten that states could die, that upheavals could be irretrievable, that fear could become the means of social cohesion, and the hysteria of joy was set over Europe at the outbreak of the First World War was a symptom of a fatuous age, but also a secure one. It revealed a millennial faith, a hope for a world which had all the blessings of the Eldurian age, made all more agreeable by the absence of an armament race and the fear of war. What minister who declared war in August 1914 would not be recoiled with the horror he had known in the shape of the world in 1918, not to speak of the present? The world, that such a world was inconceivable in 1914, is a testimony to the work of the statesmen with this book deals.